The Timeshift.
Hello and welcome, I'm Chris Hall and this is The Timeshift, my sci-fi fun fest, and it's great to have you with me as always. This week I'm talking about Thunderbirds 2015. Yes, in a previous video I had alluded that I'd be doing parallels, but you know, this is a little bit more topical and a little bit more interesting to talk about. There is a brand new, epic, huge series, a reboot nonetheless, of the classic 1960s marionette television programme, this time with CGI and things. Isn't it good? Well, I'm going to talk about it shortly, but I have to say, as this is a little bit of a review, critique kind of thing, this video is going to be spoiler heavy. So, any spoilers I may accidentally divulge, I probably will end up divulging. So if you don't want anything spoiled for you, probably best to switch the video off now. Okay, everybody ready? Everybody geared up. Let us dive head first into Thunderbirds 2015. As I said rather enthusiastically in the previous link, this is both a reboot and a prequel to the series that we all know and love, because you know that went so well in the past. Nonetheless, this is a rather fine little reboot. That's all I have to say on it. Goodbye! Okay, so I can't actually do that. So I have to say that for anyone that's wanting me to rip this to shreds, to slag it off and start ranting and raving and waving my arms about in anger, I can't really do that because, well, there's nothing about this to get particularly mad about. The big thing you've got to bear in mind with this version of Thunderbirds is that it's just a Thunderbirds for a new generation, and that's more pretty much the long and short of it. It's not trying to replace or outdo the original, it's its own separate entity. And let's be honest, there have been many different versions of Thunderbirds over the years. You have the original version, then you had that weird anime version, a link somewhere either in an annotation or in the description to this video below. You also had the live action movie from a few years ago, which was... And also there was the attempt to do a reboot of it with marionettes, which looked rather as well. I have to say, in all honesty, this is not that bad, and it's as best an adaptation, a reboot or a remake that we're realistically going to have. And the balance between the live action sets and the CGI stuff does work fairly well, though it has to be said the CGI in some moments is fairly stiff. I don't know whether they're trying to make it stiff and wooden so as to rejigger and to reference this marionette TV show, or it's just bad animation or what, I'm not 100% sure. Now, referring to my notes, I have to say that one of the things that I did kind of dislike about this version was the pace of it. Everything went along a little bit too quickly, which, you know... The original Thunderbirds, whilst action-packed, wasn't quite as fast-paced as this. The big thing about the original version was that it was all about tension and suspense. It allowed us, the audience, to think about the situation that was before us and how we, if we were in that position, to solve it. It was great because you could see things before your very eyes go from horribly wrong to, oh my god, we're all going to die. Here it pretty much goes all the way just to, oh my god, we're going to die, with no real development point to it, which is aggravating, though in honesty that may just be a sign of the times. Kids these days, it seems, want things to be live and shouting all the time, it would seem, particularly if you look at particular kids movies these days, which, you know, I kind of do for a living anyway, but whatever, we'll move on. One of the things I have to say, though, that may be an excuse for that, or at least a reasoning behind it being so fast-paced, is the fact that this is the first episode of a new series. This is, for many people, their first view into the world of Thunderbirds, so the writers of it have to pretty much explain the world and the characters as succinctly and efficiently as they possibly can do in an hour-long show. I would say that the best alternative to this would have been to introduce certain characters and aspects to the show over the course of the series, rather than trying to pack so much into 1 hour, which is what we have here. We have the introduction of the Tracy brothers, which I'm perfectly fine of. I'm fine with all them doing something in 1 episode, and it is kind of refreshing having everybody on board for an adventure, rather than what we had in the classic series, where this episode is going to be Thunderbird 2 focused, and this one is going to be Thunderbird 3 focused. You rarely see any of the other Thunderbird pilots at any other point. You might see them in the background for wacky shenanigans, but you never really see them actually taking part in the adventure, unless something big and horrible has gone wrong, or the pilot of Thunderbird 5 is having a vacation or something. You very rarely see him. You may see him at the start of an episode, but it's very rare to actually involve in an adventure itself, which, seeing them all involved and having something to do is great, even if it is, once again, just to introduce them and to do it in a way which is personally better than exposition. There is a bit of exposition in this episode, we have to be honest. The introduction of the Hood to this new series did feel rather, oh, hang on a minute, we need to stop the plot, we need to stop the story and explain who the Hood is, what he's doing and what his motivation is. I'll talk about the performance and stuff as we go on, and I'll talk about the Hood in a little bit more detail there. But as a whole entity, it was rather enjoyable. It is just a different version of Thunderbirds. I've seen numerous ones before, like I say. I've seen that very, very odd anime version, which, if you think this can be a bit silly and melodramatic, wait until you see that one. There's a few clips of it floating around on YouTube, the odd full episode here and there. If you're a fan of Thunderbirds, then I by all means go and have a look at it, because it is so very, very different. And of course you do have that attempt they had around 2005, I think it was, to bring back the series as a mixture of CGI and marionettes, and what I've seen of that looked terribly obnoxious. While this one isn't exactly reserved by any means, it's a little bit more tolerable. Of course, I do find it very, very odd that here we have an hour-long special and so much of it does feel crammed together, when realistically, once again, there doesn't really need to be. If I was in charge of this series, I'd have episode 1 just being about the Tracy brothers, about the ships that they pilot. Then in the following episode, we introduce Lady Penelope. Then after that, we introduce the Hood. Maybe have the Hood working in the background, manipulating events, doing his mean, evil, dastardly stuff, and make it so that he isn't known to the Thunderbird pilots. This is supposed to be a prequel. As far as I'm aware, they don't really know that much about the Hood in the main series, so them being totally aware of who he is feels a little bit odd for my liking. And his depiction is very Lex Luthor-esque, but once again, I'll talk about that in a little bit more detail shortly. Hopefully things will slow down as we go forward. There's going to be less exposition and less explaining of stuff. One of the things that did make the pace feel that little bit more intense is the soundtrack, which is almost a constant focus throughout every single scene, underscoring every single action. Now I can understand it for the action sequences, but when Grandma Tracy is having wacky shenanigans about her cooking, I don't really understand it there, and it is very, very loud in the mix, it has to be said. Often it's hard to make out what the characters are actually saying, which is either them just cack-handedly editing the episode together, or they're doing it so as we can't tell that the lip sync of certain characters is off. And it is off, as well as the animation being fairly stiff and wooden. There are moments when the characters' lips don't match up to what they're saying, which makes me think that maybe they animated this with some placeholder voices, just members of the production team just doing the voices initially and animated through them, which is a stupid thing to do, it has to be said. If you're going to animate anything, you animate it with the proper audio so that you get the right rhythms, so that you get the right syntax of that performance. Otherwise it looks fairly odd and out of place, it has to be said. It may just be me being a little bit too much of an animation fan that this is sticking out to me. It didn't ruin the episode, but it does at times feel a little bit odd when a voice actor sounds a lot more tense and afraid of a situation than the actual character they're portraying is. It feels very... It's hard to explain, but if you've seen the episode and things don't quite add up, that's... I don't want to say this is just me being nerdy. There's many people that have said this. Looking on Twitter, I've noticed that many people have commented about the lip sync being off. and that's the best way I can possibly say, as well as other performances, which I will once again talk about just about shortly. There's only a couple other minor story elements that did stick out to me a little bit too much. One of the things is that the Hood now seems to have some minions. Yes, whereas the Hood previously was a lone entity, now he has Daft Punk backing him up, which felt incredibly odd. I don't understand why he needs backup. I mean, he did perfectly well in the main series without a backing band, but, whatever. It did seem as though we were going to have a big fight sequence. We're actually going to see KO do something interesting, but didn't. There was an earthquake and everybody ran away. The whole Jeff Tracy thing I'm not entirely sure about, but once again, this is a prequel, so he is alive, he's just missing somewhere. I honestly hope that the big twist to this series isn't that the Hood is in fact Jeff Tracy, who has been hypnotised or lost his memory by the real Hood, because that would be stupid, and the fact I can speculate that so early on into a series means it's probably not a good idea. Oh, blimey, Charlie, but we'll see. We shall soon see. Maybe that is the case, maybe it isn't the case. I do like the character of Jeff Tracy. I like the world that he's created, this international rescue force, so having him back would at least make it feel that little bit more familiar. It is odd having Thunderbirds with certain cast members not being there, or being done in ways and means which feels odd, which is what I'm going to talk about now. Now, for the most part, the voice acting, in my opinion, was perfectly fine. This is Thunderbirds, a prequel. All the characters are naturally going to be younger, so the voice actors involved with it did a fine enough job. Well, most of them did. The the Tracy brothers did a fine job. They did a perfectly serviceable job. It's good to have the original voice of Parker back, but there's a couple of voices within this which just feel a little bit... One of those is the voice of Lady Penelope, and I'm very unsure about the depiction of Lady Penelope thus far within the series. I understand that she's supposed to be younger, but her design makes her look more like Holly Willoughby or just generic pop star television presenter more than anything else. She's supposed to be a secret agent, but she doesn't exactly look like one. Not, to be honest, that the original Lady Penelope did. That was one of the good points about it. She looked totally inconspicuous. She just looked like a typical English aristocrat, which is probably why she did so well as a secret agent. Here she looks more like a backing singer to the Saturdays or something like that, which I'm not entirely pleased about. Plus, she didn't really do much within this episode. About midway through, they say, "Oh, we need to trace the parts on that seismic bomb thingy." And I traced, and Lady Penelope says, "Oh yeah, we've traced it to a certain dealer. We're going to go investigate." And at this point I think, oh great, Lady Penelope's going to really do something now. Because I'll be honest with you, my favourite episodes within the original run of Thunderbirds were the episodes where Lady Penelope led the episode, where it was just her being her awesome secret agent self, using all the gadgets and having FAB1 with the little machine gun at the front of it, shooting metallic doors open and stuff, which sounds very stupid me saying it, but I preferred those episodes. It was a very different change of pace. It was a different world that we didn't really see that much of in the main series. The scale was a little bit smaller, and it was great to see her do something. Here she just did nothing. "Oh, we're going to investigate that thing. We found a thing." Great! So your contribution to this episode is what exactly, Lady Penelope? You found a thing. Then Parker pressed a button and nearly blew up the world. Great! Nice to see that the people that are writing this series know how to write Lady Penelope. Okay, I've got to be honest, this is very early days. She may do something a little bit more interesting as the series goes on. This is very, very early days, but for the meantime, she didn't really sell her place within all this. She feels fairly redundant. KO seems to be the more interesting of the two female characters within this. Well, there's three, Grandma Tracy, but she wears a tracksuit and makes bad cooking, and to be honest, that's a little bit more of a contribution than Lady Penelope at the moment. Lady Penelope finds a thing. That's all she does. She finds a thing. She looks for a thing. She finds a thing. And she has a little dog for some reason, which worries me. I don't understand the little dog thing. She has a little pug dog in a sweater by the looks of things. I don't understand. The dog is barely referenced. He doesn't even have a name, I don't think, at this point. So Not even in promo material. That's what I'm saying at this point. I know we're only one episode in, but no promo material saying what the dog's name is, at least not what I've seen. So it means that Lady Penelope at the moment just feels like Secret Agent Barbie, but done in a way which feels even more ineffectual than a Secret Agent Barbie would be. I mean, what's her contribution to this episode? She flies Parker flies FAB-1. For whatever reason, FAB-1 can fly now. I don't understand why. I suppose it's because of the faster pacing. She says she's going to be somewhere, Even if it feels ludicrous, she'll still be there. Parker does more than her, even if he ends up nearly endangering the whole Pacific Rim, for Christ's sake. She has a little cute dog, and she wears pretty dresses, and she has a very odd voice. I'm not entirely sure of the voice acting on this. It's that person, the caption below says who it is, who I've seen in other things. I've heard doing voice acting stuff for other things. It just, within this, feels a little bit odd. She doesn't feel like a sophisticated aristocrat. She feels like a posh, somebody trying to be posh, which, feels terribly, terribly odd. It feels more like a young woman trying to be Lady Penelope and knocking her off in a kind of way, rather than it being just a plain Lady Penelope. It is a disappointment. She doesn't really do much or really have much of a commanding presence. The thing that I liked about Lady Penelope the first time round is that she was a very strong, very ironclad female character. She didn't have to do what KO does and flip over stuff and punch up the bad guys. She used her own wit and intelligence to get over her bad guys. She didn't have to be physically tough because she was a very bright, very intelligent woman. Here she just kind of floats about, which I'm not that comfortable with, to be honest with you. Maybe this will change, but it does feel as though a certain character, which I really, really like, and I dare say is probably my favourite of the entire Thunderbirds cast, has been made a little bit impotent, which is a damn shame. Maybe this will change. I hope this will change. There's an episode where she meets up with her great auntie, who is played by Sylvia Anderson, who played the original Lady Penelope, so maybe she'll do something a little bit more substantial then. I hope that she does do something a little bit more. It was more about her than Parker. Parker was the comic relief of those two. He had his own skills and his own abilities, but it was all Lady Penelope running the show. It feels all like Parker's running the show, which, as awesome as Parker is, I'd rather have Lady Penelope doing awesome stuff than Parker, because that's just the way that it should go. The other performance I found to be a little bit peculiar was Brains. I know that a lot of people have ummed and ahed about Brains being turned from an American guy from Michigan to someone from some place in India, but the big hot thing that sends question marks around my head is not so much that decision, but his accent. In the promotional material it says that he's a genius from India, though his voice acting varies from Indian to Pakistani to Welsh at some point. Many of the comments on Twitter have been befuddled as to who, what and where he's exactly supposed to be. Some people have been confused, running, isn't Brain supposed to be one of the Tracy boys? He isn't. He's not one of the Tracy brothers. He never was. He was just a random scientist who happened to be brilliant, who could operate all that technical equipment all by himself. He has a wacky robot now, who's probably going to be a brilliant toy as well. Oh dear. Still, Brains in this version was fine. He was a little bit less of a bumbler. His stuttering has almost entirely cleared up. I know some people are going, oh, it's political correctness gone mad. My Brains was white and he stuttered. Well, the thing about the stuttering, I can understand them cutting that down a bit. Not out of political correctness, but more out of pacing. The length of time that Brains would stutter in the original series, they could have had 5 action sequences in this new version. As a whole, he's a fine character. It's just the voice acting needs to be nailed down a little bit. But once again, it may have been lost under the soundtrack, which did weigh heavily on quite a lot of what was going on within this episode. Everyone else is perfectly fine. I once again think that the Tracy brothers are fine at what they do. Speaking of Twitter, by the way, there was a weird comment that I saw on Twitter. One of the people who didn't like the episode, which is fine if you didn't like it, you're perfectly within your right to. There are certain bits of this that I really don't like, but I'll probably talk about that at a later date. As a general rule of thumb, I'm okay with it. Not double thumbs okay, but at least half of one thumb okay with it. Anyway, the comment was something along the lines of, tuned in for the new hashtag Thunderbirds Are Go show. heard the American accents, immediately switched off. Hashtag childhood ruined. I mean, let's just consider that one sentence for one moment. New American accents, hang on a minute, weren't the original Thunderbirds characters almost entirely American? I mean, the odd exception to the rule here and there, but the Tracy brothers and their father were certainly American. Brains was American. Most of the bad guys in the show were American. Or vaguely Chinese or something like that, but generally, as a general rule of thumb, most of the characters in the show were American, so getting vexed as American accents there is a little bit stupid and terribly ignorant. And probably somewhere racist as well, but Jesus Christ, who... You know what, I shouldn't get angry about it. It's Twitter, it's the internet. People say silly things. Speaking of saying silly things, time for the overview. Oh, wait, hang on, I forgot to talk about the HUD, but I'll just talk about the HUD very briefly. This version of the HUD I thought was okay. Still iffy to me. One of the things I don't like about him is that he seems a little bit more like Lex Luthor this time round than the evil super terrorist that we knew him from and feared as children. His motives seem a little bit clearer this time round, whereas when I watched it as a kid I was never entirely sure what his motives were, though once again, hardcore fans of the show probably know what his motives were back to front. The chances are they know what was in his wardrobe, for crying out loud. So, you know, I apologise for stating my ignorance ever so slightly there, but this time round it feels a little more clearer. I don't like the fact he seems to have minions this time round. One of the big things that was terribly impressive, one of the things that made him a considerable threat, was the fact that he was pretty much a one-man army. He was a great hypnotist. He sabotaged passenger planes and God knows all what else on his own, using his mastermind of masks and tomfoolery and such, which I found impressive. This time round it just seems to be, ha ha ha, I'm going to rule the world. Well, I'm not going to rule the world, I want to own the world. Somebody else can own it for me, which seems to be one of the stupidest lines from this Jurassic Pause this week's show, but still, he was okay. I didn't really feel that chill of fear when I saw him as a kid, but maybe in time he'll have a chance to do something a little bit more threatening and a little bit more scary, but whatevs. Now we will really go to the overview. Okay, so as I said earlier on, this new run of it, this first new episode, was fine, perfectly fine. I quite enjoyed it, all things said and done. There is the odd niggling problem here and there, the animation being stiff, the lip sync being off, the horrible fact that sometimes the CGI puppets look incredibly off when put next to the brilliantly well-designed backdrop, but as a whole entity it is rather enjoyable. It is a new Thunderbirds for a new generation. It's not going to appeal to me quite the same way as the one I grew up with will, but still many new kids are going to watch this. They may well in time go watch the classic series, and I'd highly recommend it to them. Chances are they're not going to be watching this, but in any case, I'd recommend it to anyone who hasn't. The original one had a different approach to it. It was more about tension and suspense rather than out-and-out action, which this version lacks, but, you know, that may well change. Next week, it's going to be back on, but it's going to be back on at about 8 o'clock in the morning. So whether or not I'll actually have a chance to see it is another matter entirely. I may watch it on a repeat or see it on demand if I at all can. So I'm not going to say that this is going to be the new focus for the Timeshift until Doctor Who comes back on, because, you know, I can't really guarantee that. I'm not even entirely sure if I'll watch next week's episode. That's not to say that I'm not interested by it. That's not to say that what I saw this week wasn't impressive. It was. It's just kind of feels like it's not for me. If you enjoyed it, then by all means, good on you. If you hated it, then by all means, good on you as well. Whatever you thought, why not leave a comment in the comment section below and tell me what you thought about it. Did you love it? Did you hate it? Do you have any questions for myself? Let me know in the comment section below, and I will get back to you at a later date, either directly in the comments or in a follow-up video. If enough people say that they want me to watch the next episode, then I probably will watch it. I'll probably watch it in any case. I need some new content here. It's going to be a good few weeks until I actually start doing the proper sit-down video reviews. Probably at least till the end of the month before we can see those. But in any case, I hope you've enjoyed the video. If nothing else, it was an experience. Thank you for watching, and goodbye.